What is up, everybody, and welcome back to Thursday's Theology. My name is Jeff, and I'm your host. And this is our last episode on the parables of Jesus. The last episode we talked about mental health and anxiety. I kind of took a little bit of a break just because seminary kind of caught up with me. I was in the midst of finals and stuff like that. So there was not a new episode this past week, so I apologize for that. But here we are again. We're going to be wrapping up the parable series, and then at the end of this episode, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the series that we're going to be doing next. But anyway, the parable that we're going to be covering today is the parable of the prodigal son. And the reason why I wanted to end with this one is because I think, well, first of all, I just love this parable, but I also think that it's one of the most representative of what Jesus is trying to communicate about God and about the kingdom of heaven. And what I mean is that the prodigal son parable is one of the ultimate examples of what it looks like to be lost and then to come back into the presence of God. So we're going to cover that a little bit more. But as always, I want to give you a little bit of the context of this particular parable. And this parable is found in in Luke 15, I believe. Yeah, Luke 15. And it's the third of three parables in Luke 15. And the context of the whole chapter is that there are three different parables, all having to do with lost things. The first one is a lost sheep. I keep falling off this ledge. Anyway, sorry. um, the first one is the parable of the lost sheep, which basically goes something like this. There's a shepherd who has 100 sheep. One of them wanders off. He leaves the 99 behind and goes to search for the one. And when he finds the lost one, he puts the sheep over his shoulders lovingly, brings it back to the flock, invites his neighbors over, and tells them, "I have found my lost sheep. Let's celebrate." So that's the first one. The second parable, right? Oh gosh. The second parable after that is the parable of the lost coin, and it's a very very short parable. It's only about 2 or 3 verses long, but and I died again. Anyway, it's about 2 or 3 verses long. But the point is of this parable is that there's a woman who loses a coin, a silver coin, and she tears apart the house looking for it. She pulls the bed sheets off. She moves the table. She sweeps. She tries to find it. So she tears her whole house apart trying to find this coin. And when she finds it, she gathers her neighbors together and says, come celebrate because the coin that I had lost, I have found. So then Jesus goes into the parable of the prodigal son. Now, what's interesting here about the context of Luke 15 is that you start off with a sheep, and then you go to a coin, and then you go to a son. So the parable of the prodigal son is also referred to as the parable of the lost son. So in Luke 15, you're dealing with three things that are lost. But if you look at the trajectory of it, you have a sheep, which, a sheep is kind of valuable. A sheep, it provides wool, provides meat, all that sort of stuff. And so it's kind of valuable. But then you get to a coin, which is more valuable. Like, a single coin in this context is a day's wage. So this woman tears apart her house looking for a day's wage, and I would too. If I was missing a day's paycheck, I would definitely tear my house apart looking for it. So you have a sheep, which is kind of valuable, a day's wage, which is more valuable, and then you get to the son, which is probably the most valuable. We've talked a little bit before about what having a son meant in Jewish society, but suffice it to say, it's a very, very important thing for your family to be able to pass on your family name, etc., etc. So that being said, you have a sheep, a coin, and a son. So Jesus is getting more and more valuable in his examples that he's using. So the parable of the prodigal son goes like this. A father has two sons. The younger son tells his father, give me my inheritance, which is basically saying, I wish you were dead. So he doesn't have a very good relationship with his father. He says, I wish you were dead, give me my money. So the father, without, being angry or anything, decides to give his younger son what he wants. So he gathers his stuff together and splits it down the middle and gives his younger son his portion of the inheritance. So the younger son goes off and gathers his things, and then a couple days later he leaves town. He goes to a foreign country, and the Bible talks about how he wasted his money on wild lifestyles. Now, here we need to also maintain the idea that this wild lifestyle includes drinking, includes sleeping around, includes partying. All that stuff is intended for us to understand what type of lifestyle he was living off of his father's money. So just remember that. Now, he has a lot of friends in this foreign nation, but as soon as his money runs out, he's abandoned. He becomes, oh, I got shot. He Once his money runs out, his friends run out as well. So what happens is that he decides like, oh, I need to work, so let me hire myself out to a foreigner. So he hires himself out to a foreign boss, and his boss ends up putting him in the fields with pigs to feed them. And he gets to such a point where he's just like, I'm hungry. I want to eat what these pigs are eating. So I want to pause right there and talk about what this means. The reason why Jesus is using this as such as an example is because he wants to show to what extent the prodigal son has fallen away. Now, wishing death upon his father, he's showing disrespect to his father, so that's pretty self-explanatory. But him going to a foreign nation is an interesting detail because it's basically saying that I am rejecting everything it means to be Jewish and I want to go off and be by myself. So he goes and be off to be by himself, and forsakes everything of his Jewish identity by leaving the Jewish community and going to a foreign nation. So when his money runs out, when he's hired by a foreign boss, that's also going against Jewish custom because you're supposed to, interact with Gentiles, but not work for them, not submit yourself to them. So it's an interesting thing to be hired out by a foreigner. So that's interesting in of itself. Now, what the boss requires him to do is to go into the field and feed pigs. Now, that's really, really interesting because pigs, according to Jewish custom, are unclean animals. Therefore, if you're feeding pigs, if you're working with pigs, then you are unclean yourself. So, he's unclean by working with pigs. But then it goes even further to say he also longed to eat what the pigs are eating. So he wants to defile himself, not only by touching pigs, but also eating what they're eating. So the reason why Jesus uses this such an extreme example is because he's saying, look how far he has fallen. Look how far this son has gone from being in his father's house to in a field eating, longing to eat what pigs are eating. Jesus is using this as an extreme example to show how far he has fallen. So then the prodigal son thinks to himself one day, he's like, oh, even the servants in my father's house are eating better than I am. So let me go back to my father. So he says that in his mind, the only way that his father is going to accept him is if he begs his father to take him on as a servant. He knows that he's lost the right to become a son again. So he rehearses in his head like, okay, I've sinned against heaven and against you, and I'm no longer worthy to be called your son, but hire me as one of your workers. That's what he rehearses in his mind all the way home. Now, when he returns home, his father sees him from a distance and runs out to meet him. His father abandons everything it means to be an upstanding Jewish man. You don't run out of the household to greet people. People come to you in the household. So he forsakes his dignity and runs out to his son and embraces him. And the son, having rehearsed this speech in his head, starts to say, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called a son. But his father doesn't let him finish. He instructs his servants, bring a robe, put it on his back, bring a signet ring and put it on his finger, bring the fattened calf because we have to celebrate. So that's how his younger son is received. He doesn't get a chance to finish the speech he's rehearsed this whole time because his father is so happy to see him that he puts everything aside. He runs out to him, clothes him, and basically they feast with one another. Now, the older son comes back from the field and notices that there's a party going on. And he asks one of the servants, hey, what's going on? And the servant says, hey, your brother has come back. He was dead, but now he's alive, and your father has prepared the fattened calf to feast. And the older brother is livid. He is so pissed off that his younger brother is back and that he's being celebrated by his father by having this fattened calf, which is a special animal set aside for celebration. And he's pissed. So the father again leaves the household to go out and talk to the older brother. So the father, remember, leaves the household to greet the younger son, which is out of the norm, but he also leaves the house again to go out and talk to the older son. So the father abandons the household twice to go in search of his sons. Now, there's a lot more that could be said about this, but I want to end it by saying, no matter if you've been in the Father's household for all your life, or you've lived a wild lifestyle and decided to come back, the Father's waiting for you with open arms. And that's the point Jesus is trying to make. There is celebration for those who are coming back to God after living a lifestyle of sin and partying and wasting your resources and all that stuff. That God is waiting for you with open arms. And I think that's such a beautiful message from this parable, because it doesn't, remember how Jesus uses this extreme example of the younger son to show, look how far he has fallen. And that's it's crazy that the father accepts the younger son after the lifestyle he's lived, but nonetheless he embraces the son with open arms. So again, there's a lot more that could be said about this parable, but I think the main point being is that no matter how far you've fallen, no matter how far you've gone in your life, God is always waiting for you with open arms and a signet ring and a robe and a festival and a feast to celebrate your return. So it doesn't matter how far you've strayed. The fact of the matter is that God is waiting for you with open arms. So that's, I think, a perfect way to end this study on the parables. Now, for next time, we're going to get into a series. I haven't really decided what to call it yet, but it's going to be basically asking some questions of, like, should Christians do this? Should Christians say this? Should Christians do that? Because growing up, I heard, Christians shouldn't drink, they shouldn't party, they shouldn't get tattoos, all that sort of stuff. So this next series, we're going to explore what it means for a Christian to do those things, if they should or not. So, yeah, that's where we're going to be going from here on out. But as always, thanks again for joining us this week. We really appreciate you giving us the time throughout your week to listen and participate in this crazy idea of playing video games and talking about theology. So thanks again for joining us. My name is Jeff. I'm your host. And remember, theology doesn't always have to be difficult. It is simply the study of who God is. Take care. We'll see you next week.